cmpradio.net, the voice of Chester.
Good afternoon, my beautiful community, my beautiful fans, my beautiful followers. Welcome back for another edition of WWJD's special interview segments. As promised, I have our state rep of the 161st District, Leanne Krueger. How are you?
How are you? It's so great to be with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Leanne, one thing that WWJD does, we choose a word of the week every week. And in WWJD's fashion, this week will be the same. And this week's word is shift. Move or cause to move from one place to another, especially over a small distance. When you hear the word shift, what does that mean to you?
So I think there's shifts happening at every level right now, right? A lot of folks are paying attention to things that they weren't necessarily paying attention to before. Right before this, my legislative office in Ridley was full of a classroom of pre-K kids. Yeah. And one of the things I was talking to their teachers about, they came for a class trip because, we've worked really closely to promote education funding in the 7 years I've been in office. And one of the things that I was talking to their teachers about is this group of 4-year-olds came in with some pretty significant learning loss. This was their first educational experience. They're headed to kindergarten next year. And because of the pandemic and because of all of the shifts we've seen
Absolutely.
In our world over the past couple of years, needs are great right now.
Yes. I always say that we haven't even really felt the effects of that shift completely because of the pandemic and taking our children out of school for 2 years, and even now, half virtual, half in classroom. So getting right to it, who is Leanne Krueger?
Well, I'm proud to have been representing the 161st District here in Delaware County for the past 7 years. I won my election as a Democrat in a Republican majority district by just under 700 votes, and I've been working incredibly hard ever since then to continue to earn the votes to send me back to Harrisburg. I love what I do, and at the end of the day, the things that I get to do to actually help make people's lives better is the most rewarding part of my work. I'm also a single mom. I have a 10-year-old son, and he was 2 when I ran the first time, 3 when I was sworn in, so I very much do this work with him in mind. He comes with me to many events, and when we were in virtual schooling, he sat on my lap at times, during legislative voting sessions, because I didn't have any other option, like so many other parents.
Big shout out to all of our single mothers out there. It is a big task. My mom had 5 boys and 1 girl, so.
Bless her.
Yes, bless her heart, bless yours as well. Where did you grow up, Leanne?
So I grew up in New Jersey, and then I came here to Delaware County for grad school just about 20 years ago. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and then she went to work as a secretary. And my dad went to night school at Rutgers University. So I grew up just a little while from there. I did my undergrad work there, and then moved to Pennsylvania after that. And I've spent 2 years in Harrisburg working with low-income families. Spent a year in South Africa when I was in graduate school.
Wow.
And I, came back to this area, and I've been in Delco since then.
What kind of kid was Leanne?
Here's a story I will tell you. My mom took me to the doctor because she thought there was something wrong with me because I read too much. Because I was that kid who always had a book in my hand.
Wow.
I loved going to the library. I don't know if you remember, but back then, sometimes in the summer there were these mobile libraries that would come, and there weren't a lot of books, and I was always excited when a book came to me. I loved animals. I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then when I was in college, I worked in a veterinary office and decided I wanted to spend my life helping people instead. I was an artist. I only had boys in my neighborhood, so I was very much a tomboy growing up, climbing trees, coming home with ripped jeans and everything else.
One of your favorite childhood memories?
I wanted a dog for the longest time, and it took years and years and years for me to convince.
Did you name it before you got the dog?
I didn't. And so the first dog that we adopted was a pit bull mixed that was named Buffy. I can't remember who got to name the dog. I don't know if it was my brother, who's 2.5 younger than me, but the day that we finally brought a dog home was one of my favorite childhood memories.
Shout out to Buffy.
Buffy, unfortunately,
yes.
Like all of the pets that we love,
yes,
crossed the rainbow bridge at some point, and then we had a number of dogs in our life after that.
Awesome. Who was one of the most influential people in your life?
So I always loved my teachers growing up, the folks who would help me learn. I was always curious. And so there's a number of teachers that I can think back to. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Sherwood, who I'm still Facebook friends with.
Hey, Miss Sherwood.
I remember her helping to open up my love of books and reading and creativity. And I have been grateful to have some wonderful public school teachers in my life. And one of the things I'm fighting for in Harrisburg is for every kid to have that same opportunity.
Absolutely. What was your first job?
So I started working from the time that I was allowed to work. I had a job through high school, a job through college, a job through my graduate program. I worked as my mom was a secretary to a lawyer, and so I had a job filing files. And if you've ever been to a law office before everything was digital, there was piles of manila files everywhere. So I did that, and I was a camp counselor at the same time. But then when I was in high school, I worked for a cat breeder. My job was to clean 30 litter boxes twice a week and take care of the cats. I worked in a veterinary hospital. I spent a summer working in a home for folks with developmental disabilities, severe needs, helping to keep them safe. And so I've had all kinds of interesting jobs over the course of my life.
That's really dope. This is the time in my show. One thing we're big on WWJD about, my audience knows, is that we love giving out flowers, whether verbally or physically, and it stems from a statistic, and I know you all heard it before, that most men don't receive their first bouquet of flowers until their funeral. So it started me, Pierre, along with a couple of our brothers from the radio station and community workers. We went to Memorial Park on Father's Day. We handed out 100 roses to the dads. So I wanted to take the time out to give you your flowers and to thank you so much for all the work that you do in the community. It is greatly appreciated, and we genuinely thank you. We know that it is a hard job.
I appreciate that. And again, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be here with you today and to talk to your listeners.
Absolutely. Now getting down to some of the meat and potato stuff. Why state rep? And can you speak about your district being extended?
Yep. So I ran for office for the first time in 2014. And I ran against an incumbent and lost, and then he resigned a few months later, and I won in 2015 in a special election. The reason I ran in that first race is because I didn't feel like they were making decisions in Harrisburg that really benefited the people I cared about. I spent 15 years in the nonprofit sector. I ran an organization that helped people start businesses, supported entrepreneurs with a focus on entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs. And I saw that in Harrisburg, all of these tax breaks were given out to these out-of-state companies, trying to attract them to come in. And the folks that I knew, the men and women who were starting businesses and employed their neighbors and created opportunities for growth for folks, they weren't getting any of that. They didn't have lobbyists in Harrisburg, and so I ran for office because I wanted to make a difference. And I have to tell you, 7 years in, I've been recruited to run for other things. I've always said no because the issues that I care about most right now are decided in our state capitol, now more than ever, actually.
Absolutely. I'm a big advocate for the underdog and the small guys. It's what we do. It's what I do here at WWJD. What Pierre does, what Safe Corridor does. These are all boots to the ground grassroots organizations that really do a tremendous amount of work in the community. So it's always a blessing to have someone fighting for those smaller groups. What are some of the notable things you have gotten done in your district?
So one of the things I'm proudest of is our Constituent Services. My district office is the third busiest in the state. That means in terms of number of phone calls we get, emails, folks who come in for help, and we spend almost all of our time cutting through red tape and getting results for folks. Shortly after I was elected, there was a veteran from Aston who was also a firefighter who was killed tragically in a motorcycle accident. His family reached out because they wanted him buried next to his father in a veteran cemetery, and there was some red tape that was holding that up, and this family hadn't been able to bury him, and they hadn't been able to truly grieve. And so I had just been elected. I didn't actually know exactly how you did these things, but I just kept calling, and I kept calling and calling, and my office kept calling, and eventually we got to Senator Casey, and I got to be with his family the day that he was buried.
Wow, that's awesome.
And, you know, that was just a couple months in. Over the course of the pandemic, we helped over 5,000 people navigate the unemployment compensation system, which is challenging. It was made hard on purpose by people who don't actually believe in unemployment. We helped businesses who had to navigate through understanding some of the regulations and advocating for them to get loan funding and then grant funding. And we brought a lot of grant funding to businesses here in Delaware County. I've fought really hard to bring money back to my district for our public schools, for park projects, for senior programs. But at the end of the day, it's when I've got someone sitting across me in my office or on the phone who needs help and we're able to get that done. Those are the most meaningful days for me.
Awesome. And can you talk a little bit about the expansion of your district due to the census?
Yeah, so we're in a redistricting year, which means that the maps are changing. Every 10 years after the census, the maps get redrawn to balance out the population. Each of us have between 64 and 65,000 people that we represent in our State House district. And so because we've had a lot of population growth here in the Southeast, including in Delaware County, and there's been population lost out in Western Pennsylvania, the lines have changed a lot this year. And so when folks go to vote on November 8th, they'll be voting for their new state representative in the new map. Okay. And so my district has always included Aston through Ridley. In the new maps, I lose the borough of Swarthmore, and I pick up Chester Township and Upland, and then the lower part of Middletown. And so these are new communities to me. For the first time, I'm representing part of the Chester Upland School District. So I spent the entire summer knocking on doors in places like Toby Farms and Upland, getting out to meet folks, hearing from people face to face about the issues that matter to them. I know what the statistics say in Harrisburg, but I found unless I'm talking to somebody face to face, I don't actually know what their needs are.
Awesome. What are 3 main changes you would like to see in the community you serve, and what is your plan to implement them?
In talking to especially folks in Chester Township and Upland, hearing a lot of parents who are really struggling with the public schools. I don't have a silver bullet solution because it's taken decades for us to get where we are right now. But I promise that I will fight to bring every resource I can to the Chester Upland School District. I know that there's been a lot of change in administration. There's been a lot of change in teachers. I've talked to parents at the door. I've talked to kids at the door. I've talked to teachers at the door. We really need to support this local school district because I believe education is really the key to everything.
It's the foundation to everything. What you know is your greatest power. I always tell the kids that it's the greatest thing that any human being can possess is your knowledge, what you know.
And I had the honor of serving on the PlanCon Commission a couple years ago. So this is the commission, bipartisan commission, that helped recommend how the state should reimburse school districts for school construction funding. As a part of that commission, I spent 2 years visiting schools across the state. And when I was elected, the first thing I did was visit every public school in my district. And I'm in the process of getting out to visit the new schools now that have been drawn into the district. And I will never forget the day that we spent the morning in Montgomery County in a very wealthy school district where the kids literally had technology to predict where earthquakes were going to happen. And that afternoon we were in West Philly and Overbrook High School where they didn't have running water in the science classrooms. And so the inequity of how education resources are spent in this state, I think, is an incredibly huge problem. And from the day I got to Harrisburg, I've been fighting for our public schools, and I will continue to fight.
Awesome. What would you say about the people in your district? Just from knocking on doors and getting to know people, what would you say about the people in your district?
So the 161st district is incredibly diverse. Under the last map, it had been what's called racially packed to be safer for the Republican incumbent. So it was 97% white. And literally any community of color had been cut out and packed into what was Brian Kirkland's district, the 159th. The maps become fair in this new redistricting. So my district becomes 12% African American. Those folks are concentrated mostly in Toby Farms and Upland Borough, but you've got folks everywhere across the county. There's a big diversity in terms of educational background. We've got Rose Valley, which has the highest concentration of PhDs in the state, and then we've got a lot of blue-collar union families too in this district. And so the needs are diverse. My position on issues has changed and evolved as a result of the folks that I've been representing, and in this new district, it will continue to evolve again, I'm sure. Absolutely.
You spoke a little bit about being a single mother. How much has that impacted what you do today and how you do it, and how much of it has inspired your work that you do in the community?
I think it's impacted and inspired my work, to be honest with you. A lot of folks are talking about inflation right now. And as a single mom on a budget, responsible for all my own bills and my property taxes in the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District, which are high, lately there's been times...
Yes, I lived out Swarthmore, so...
There have been times when I've picked up something in the grocery store, looked at the price tag, and put it back because it didn't fit my monthly budget this month. And I know that there's so many people in that same situation. I also want the same thing for every kid that my son has. He is in a good public school at Nether Providence Elementary. He's got teachers that care about him. He, during the pandemic, was able to be back in school virtually pretty quickly, and then they had the kids in person as soon as they could. I want everyone to have that.
Absolutely. They deserve it.
They do.
Every child deserves the fair chance at a great education. It's one of the most free things we can give, is what we know, and passing it down. What would you say is your greatest weakness as well as your greatest strength?
I am a workaholic. So my greatest weakness is that I will work and work and work, and sometimes to neglect to take care of myself. And that has been very much a learning edge for me over time, because representing 65,000 people, the work is never done. I do not have a 9-to-5 job. I'm working nights, I'm working weekends, I'm up early for meetings, I put my son on the bus, and then I go to Harrisburg for voting session. And, that is not a sustainable pace forever. But my work has always been, sort of at the front of my priority list.
And what would you say would be your greatest this strength?
I think it's evolved over time, but I've become a lot more empathetic in my time in the legislature, having folks sit across from me and tell me their stories. And sometimes I think as an elected official, my job is just to bear witness to the trauma that people have experienced. Sometimes we can help, sometimes we can help a lot, and sometimes I think people just need to be heard. And so realizing that even if it's somebody who's trolling me online right now, they've been through things too. And I need to approach everybody that I interact with empathy.
Awesome. What's your take on mental health in today's world?
Oh, the need is so great right now. Every mental health provider I know has a waiting list. And even though we were able to fight for some additional mental health funding in the state budget, $95 million coming to public schools this year as a result of the votes that we cast in Harrisburg, it's not enough. My district office has gotten calls from parents of kids in crisis, and we've been on the phone right along with the school social workers trying to find people a bed, because there are no inpatient beds for kids in all of Delaware County. And on the good days we can find a bed, but we've had to send kids to Delaware. Yeah. And this is even after we've had a school social worker say to us, yes, this child is at very high risk of completing suicide.
In the new election year, do you have any plans on raising awareness for mental health in the community? Always, in my opinion, it's the silent killer of our community. It's the thing that we just don't talk about. We're just now getting to a point where we're okay with talking about it publicly and saying, hey, I have PTSD, or I have anxiety, or I have depression. I think a lot of time what happens is we're being bombarded with all these commercials, but they're not telling us exactly what's the symptoms of depression, what's the symptoms of anxiety, what's the symptoms of PTSD. And it's just constantly throwing these big words out there with no explanation, no education behind it. Do you have any plans on raising awareness for mental health?
So we've always talked about it in my district office, and anytime there's a new resource available, we have shared that out there. So we've, when funding comes through, the new, the fact that you don't need to call 911 anymore if you have a family member having a mental health crisis, for example, is something that we've promoted through our office. But a lot of it has been people calling us and sharing their struggles, and us helping to connect the dots to get them to resources.
And is that number that they can call, is that a simple number, or do you have that number offhand?
It is, let me look it up real quick. Can we come back to
Yes,
that?
we can come back, or I'll post it. So look forward to seeing that number, because that's dope. You just taught me something new.
I don't want to give you the wrong number, because I know that you've got folks listening who may be looking for this. But again, I think too many times someone's having a mental health crisis and a police officer shows up when you really need a social worker.
Yes.
But I also think we need to do everything we can to make sure those waiting lists aren't too long. Because when you have a parent on the other end of the phone who is terrified, and it's a 3-month wait to get their kid in, or a family member and it's a 3-month wait, that's not right. I've talked to our local school superintendents after the money was authorized in Harrisburg, and one of them said to me, well, that's great, but I don't have anyone to hire right now. Yes, there's money, but there's not enough therapists. There's not enough school social workers. You can't find a school psychologist right now. And so the people to provide the resources and care aren't there. A lot of folks in that field burnt out during the pandemic. Yeah. And we just haven't been able to replace the qualified professionals that we need to serve our community. And we need beds in Delaware County for folks experiencing mental health crises.
Yes. I also say that we need more strategic educational curriculums in the school. I say that because you don't hear anybody saying, I want to be a firefighter anymore. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a therapist. You don't hear these things in the classroom no more. Everybody wants to be, I want to be a blogger. I want to be an influencer. I want to do this. And they just want to be famous. They want to be big. Nobody wants to be mayor. growing up, we heard all those things, right? Everybody wanted to be a police officer, a firefighter, or a doctor. Like, they were the three main choices. You just don't hear it anymore. So, which goes to my next question. And you already answered this because you're an avid reader. You're very big on education. But the next question was, what's your take on education in today's world?
We need to put more of a focus on education in the state of Pennsylvania. We're one of the worst states in the country for inequity in terms of how much resources the state puts in versus local property tax payers, which is why our property taxes are so high, because there's no place to make up the difference. We've got families here in Delaware County that are in a lawsuit suing the state of Pennsylvania for not fulfilling our constitutional obligation to a fair and equitable education for every kid. So part of it's resources, part of it's policy, part of it is that we have passed these unfunded mandates in Harrisburg that make life harder for teachers and parents and kids. A whole lot of money is going into standardized testing companies, and I don't think all of those tests are meaningful. I hosted a policy hearing early on the Keystone exams, which are a very high stakes exam that for a period of time the legislature thought you were going to need to pass in order to graduate from high school. And I had a mom and an 8th grader in my office who was taking, he was on track for AP classes, but he was having a hard time getting a certain score on one test, and that was going to impact his whole educational career.
Wow.
And so oftentimes we've got these politicians in Harrisburg that come up with ideas that they just want to put onto our public schools, and our teachers and administrators and kids are just struggling to survive some days right now. So I think really it all does come back to education. As someone who had been on the PlanCon Commission, I've sat on the Appropriations Committee for 6 years, so any vote that impacts the budget has to come through the Appropriations Committee. I spent an extra 3 weeks in Harrisburg in February and March because every department needs to come before us, and I get to ask them questions. And we really need to fix the brokenness that we've got here in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. What was one of the biggest things in life that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
There's been a number of things over the years, I think some of which I'm willing to share publicly and some I'm not there yet. But I would say running and losing my first election was tough. I ran hard, and to come out of that and to not have made it through, I knew the moment that I did, that when I had the opportunity to run again and win, that I would do it. And then, the incumbent Republican resigned 3 months later and shocked everybody. But I think coming out of a loss like that, whether you're someone who's a competitive athlete who's had a loss, or someone who's run for office and had a loss, it causes you to regroup and sort of rethink some things. And then when I had the opportunity to run again, I was a lot more focused and clear on what I needed to do to win and to represent my community well.
Awesome. What is one of your favorite quotes?
So, the Gandhi quote, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." The fact that we need to take action. I myself am a person of faith, and so I believe that those of us who are people of faith need to live that faith in the steps that we walk, in the actions that we take. And there was a whole movement of businesses, benefit corporations that were formed, inspired by that quote, of companies that decided to give back to their communities and their stakeholders, not just making corporate profits, but benefiting their workers, their customers, the communities in which they're located. And they're called benefit corporations, B corporations, and they were all inspired by that line.
For the young men and women that's watching our show, can you please, in your words, explain the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and why you chose Democrat?
Well, in Harrisburg right now, there's a pretty big difference. And, I don't serve in Congress in Washington, so I don't see that from a day-to-day basis. In Harrisburg, the Democratic Party and myself and my colleagues have put forth many common sense solutions to gun violence. I have tried procedural motions on the House floor multiple times, and we can't get a vote on that issue. The only gun bill that's moved recently is one to actually lower the age to carry a concealed weapon without a permit and to remove the permit process, which is one of the safeguards we've got in place to make sure that folks who shouldn't have a weapon can't get a weapon. That's a pretty big difference right now, because as I've been knocking on doors in the new parts of my district, I hear people talk about crime and safety, and we haven't been able to get one vote on a common sense gun safety bill in the entire 7 years that I've been in the legislature. When we talk about education funding, the Democrats have fought hard and walked alongside Governor Wolf to get record education funding in this year's budget. On the other side of the aisle, we see increased what's called the EITC program that diverts money from public schools and gives it to private schools. And so, one side is trying to put resources in, the other side is trying to pull resources out. Another issue that I've heard about a lot at the doors is women's health and protecting access to abortion. One side wants to expand access to women's health, and the other side wants to ban it altogether.
When you leave here today, what are some of the things that you would like our audience to remember about Leanne Krueger?
Well, again, I'm new to the new parts of my district. I'm doing everything I can to knock on doors and get to meet folks in Chester Township and Upland and in the new part of Middletown. Help educate me. I've been meeting with folks in the community. I want to learn how to be a strong advocate for these new communities in Harrisburg in the same way that I have been for the folks that I've been representing for a while. So let me know what matters to you. My door is open. My legislative office is incredibly accessible for legislative issues. We don't do anything political out of the legislative office. We keep those things completely separate, which frankly didn't always happen here in Delaware County. But help me learn how I can serve you better.
Awesome. So I gave Ed the chance to answer this question. I'll give you the chance as well. Why you and not Ed?
I think that I have proven that I fight hard for the folks that I represent. I always show up, whether it's an election year or not an election year. I have fought for millions and millions of dollars for projects that matter here in our community. My legislative office is the third busiest in the state when it comes to the number of people that we've served. And so I am running on a proven track record, and my work is not yet done. I'm in the minority party in Harrisburg, so I have written bills that have not yet passed because I serve on committees where the majority chairman, the Republican, literally says I don't run Democratic bills. And I've worked across the aisle in a number of instances. For example, the Chester Water Authority is an issue that matters a lot. We want to keep our water local. We don't want
Indeed we do.
A multinational corporation to be able to take it over in a hostile takeover. I've been working on that issue for years now, and I've actually been working with a Republican colleague in Chester County whose district is also served by Chester Water Authority. So we've got some bills that we've worked on together. Unfortunately, Aqua has very powerful lobbyists, and we're still working to try to get those things done.
Awesome. Is there any big events or any community events that's coming up that you would like to let the people know about?
So we are active all the time. We have a community meet and greet in Chester Township this weekend, 3 to 6 p.m. at Cooper's. So come by and meet me. I'll be at the Upland Community Fair coming up. I'll be at Aston Community Day. We are everywhere we can be in order to get services out to the community.
Awesome. For the viewers, please, I urge you to go back, look at all of the special interviews, all the politicians as a voter. These are interviews that you want to see. These are questions that you want to see answered. Please tune in. Thank you so much for joining me for another special segment of WWJD's What Would Josh Do special interview segments. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thanks so much.